Now we're going to have a look at applying our piping. So if you're not going to make piping and you're not doing piping, then you can ignore this video completely. So you've made your piping already, and you will be cutting to the appropriate length based on what the measurements say in the pattern. You're going to make marks on the side of your exterior panels, and that will depend on which pattern you're doing. I'm making the larger one, so my mark is 3 inches away from the top, and I'm going to mark the centre of the bottom as well. I'm not measuring that, I'm just going to fold it in half and make my mark. I'm going to take my piece of piping that I've cut to the appropriate length based on the pattern, and I'm going to fold it in half to find the centre. Now, to find the centre of this, all I'm going to do is just fold it in half. I'm just going to make a small clip just in the seam allowance to mark the centre, and then I'm going to position my piping, and I'm going to make that centre mark match with the centre mark that I've made on the bottom of my bag, and I'm going to have those open edges towards the outside of my bag, and I'm just going to clip that on, and then I'm going to continue to clip all the way along that bottom edge, making sure that the sides of my piping match my bottom edge. Now, as I get towards these curves, I can force my piping around the curves, but it looks all puckered as I do it. So what I'm going to do as I get to the curve is I'm going to make small cuts about, I guess, about 1/4 of an inch apart, just for the next couple of inches of my piping, to help it ease around the curve without bumping. I'm not cutting as far as my stitch line, I'm just going to probably 1/8 of an inch away from my stitch line. Actually, I probably need one a bit further, a bit this end, towards this end. And you'll see then that your piping will easily bend. Let me just click that and then I can show you better. Easily bend around that curve without puckering. Just clip it in place. If I clip the other one without, let me just put this on so I can actually show you the difference that it makes clipping into the seam allowance. So this side I'm not actually clipping into, I'm just going to clip it in place. It's actually quite tough to clip it in place properly, but so that's without clipping into the seam allowance of my piping, and you can see there that the piping's not sitting smoothly, it's got a bump and a pucker. On this side, where I've clipped into my piping into the seam allowance, the piping sits beautifully around that curve, and the edges are absolutely perfect with the edges of my exterior panel. So that's why we do those clips. So I'm just going to clip this side. As I say, the clips are about 1/4 of an inch apart. It's not measured. It's just to ease that, be able to ease the piping around the curve. If you've bought pre-made piping, it's often clipped all the way along already, so you don't need to add any additional clips to it, any additional cutting. Excuse me. So we're just going to clip all the way around those curves and then up the sides. Until we get to that mark that we made, the 3-inch mark. When I get to the 3-inch mark, I put my fingernail on the piping at the point where the 3-inch mark is, and then I just fold that piping out, towards the outside edge and clip it in place. So the piping is now curving out towards the edge. I'm going to do exactly the same on the other side. piping something that makes a bag, a simple bag, look really classy, but a lot of people are terrified of it. If you do it slowly and carefully, it's fine. So I'm at that 3-inch gap, 3-inch mark again, and I'm just gonna curve that out towards the outside edge. So now my piping is all attached all the way around the outside. Now you can use a zipper foot for this, or I've just dropped all of my feet on the floor, or you can use a piping foot. This is a piping foot, and what happens with this is that one side of the it's got grooves in the bottom, so you can either have piping to the left or to the right, and you basically put that groove on top of your piping, and it kind of follows the piping round so that it kind of guides where the needle is, so you know that your line of stitching is going to be absolutely the same distance between the side of the piping and the side of the bag. However, this isn't Teflon, and I find that it's actually quite sticky to do, so I tend to use my Teflon zipper foot, or cording foot as it's called, to stitch all the way around the outside. Now what we're going to do is, I'm just going to release that clip. We're going to stitch all the way, just making sure that that's absolutely spot on around the outside. And again, we're trying to keep as close to our piping cord as we possibly can. So take it nice and slowly, removing the clips as you go. Let's just raise the camera a little bit. Let me bring you a little bit closer. Again, I'm using a dark coloured thread so that if I don't quite catch it as I should do, it won't actually show. It helps to disguise any slight bloopers you might make with your piping if you use a thread that matches what you're actually doing. You shouldn't see any of this stitching in the finished bag, but there are occasions where sometimes you just don't go quite as close to the piping cord as you might want to, and that can sometimes show. But I'll show you that when we start construction and how to fix it if you actually have that problem. Go slowly as you go around the corners, curves, corners, you know what I mean, the bits at the bottom. And the other thing that's quite good for doing this is an adjustable zipper foot, but I haven't got a Teflon adjustable zipper foot, and I do like to do this using a Teflon foot. It just slides across the faux leather a lot quicker and a lot easier. So again, I'm keeping my foot butted up against the cording that's in the top of my piping. And in theory, you should actually be stitching over the same stitch line as you actually made on your original piping when you were making your piping. If you didn't use stitching, if you used double-sided tape, then obviously that's not going to be the case. And this is why, if you're using double-sided tape, you need to make sure that it's the stuff that you can stitch through, because you will be stitching through the tape. And for those people that are wondering how I'm going around the curves without raising my foot, I've got a knee lift on my machine, so I use my knee lift rather than the little knobble at the back to lift my foot. It means I can lift it up a tiny bit as opposed to kind of having to lift it right up. And I just use my knee to just raise it up as I need to go round. Something I never thought I'd use on a machine, but now I can't actually stitch without a knee lift. I find it quite difficult, and if I'm using a machine that doesn't have one, I find myself whacking my knee against the edge of the table every 2 seconds because I forget that I don't have it on. As you get to this end, Again, take that clip off, but hold it down with your finger just to make sure it doesn't unfold. A couple of back stitches at the end just to secure your stitching. Let's get rid of the thread ends. And you can see that that's secured my piping and that corner that we made all the way around. It's sitting nice and smoothly around the outside edge and up to this side where it's also out at 90 degrees. And we're going to do exactly the same thing on our second side. You could actually just put piping on one side if you wanted to. But I think if you're going to do it, you might as well go the whole hog and do it on both sides. So I'm going to carry on and do the piping on my second exterior panel in exactly the same way as I did it on my first exterior panel. And I'll come back to you and we'll start looking at how we start constructing the exterior part of our bag.